The night was like any other at Memorial Hospital until Code Blue echoed through the halls. As chaos erupted, everyone ran toward the emergency, except him. The security guard everyone ignored for years stood perfectly still, his eyes scanning. Exits, calculating distances, moving with precision that had nothing to do with hospital training. That's when she saw it. The way he carried himself wasn't civilian. It was something else entirely. Welcome to the Hidden Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden warriors and silent guardians, tell me in the comments, where are you? Watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who never stopped serving. Memorial Hospital sat on the edge of downtown Chicago, a 15-story tower of glass and steel that never slept. Day and night, ambulances screamed through its doors, doctors rushed between floors, and nurses moved with the quiet efficiency of people who knew that every second mattered. But in all that chaos, in all that movement, there was one man who never seemed to hurry. His name was Marcus. At least, that's what his badge said. Marcus Chun, Security. He'd been working the night shift for 3 years, always arriving at exactly 10:45 p.m., always leaving at exactly 7:15 a.m. He wore the same navy blue uniform, the same black boots that made no sound on the hospital's polished floors, and carried himself with a stillness that made him almost invisible. The nurses on the night shift barely knew he existed. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. When they passed him in the corridors, he'd nod once, maybe say, "Evening," and continue his rounds. He never lingered, never made small talk, never seemed interested in the hospital gossip that filled the break rooms during the long, quiet hours before dawn. Dr. Martinez, who'd been working nights for 8 years, once joked that Marcus was like a ghost. "You know he's there," she said during a coffee break, "but you never really see him. It's like he moves through walls." Nurse Sarah Williams had worked the trauma unit for 5 years, and even she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a real conversation with him. He was just part of the landscape, like the vending machines or the security cameras. Always there, never noticed, but Sarah was observant. It came with the job. When you spent your nights patching up gunshot wounds and car accident victims, you learned to notice things others missed. And over the past few months, she'd started noticing things about Marcus that didn't quite add up, like the way he walked. Most security guards shuffled, slouched, moved with the casual authority of someone whose biggest concern was checking locked doors. Marcus moved differently. His posture was straight, his steps measured, his head constantly moving in small, precise scans of his surroundings. It reminded her of something, but she couldn't place what. Then there was his reaction to emergencies. When codes were called, when alarms went off, when chaos erupted in the E, most people either ran toward the action or froze in place. Marcus didn't either. He became still, perfectly, unnaturally still, like a predator that had just caught a scent. Sarah first noticed it during a gang shooting that brought 6 victims to the trauma bay in the span of 10 minutes. While doctors and nurses rushed between beds, while family members screamed in the waiting room, Marcus had positioned himself near the main entrance, his back to the wall, his eyes tracking every person who entered, not watching like a curious bystander, watching like someone who expected trouble and was ready for it. But it was his hands that caught her attention most. During quiet moments, when he thought no one was looking, Marcus would unconsciously touch his left shoulder, then his right side, then his neck. Quick, precise movements, like he was checking for something that wasn't there anymore. Sarah had seen that behavior before, in veterans who'd been wounded in combat. Muscle memory from checking gear, armor, weapons that were no longer there. Night, everything changed, started like any other. November rain drummed against the hospital windows, and the emergency department had been unusually quiet. Sarah was restocking supplies in Trauma Bay 3 when she heard Marcus's footsteps in the corridor. Even, measured, unhurried. "Evening, Sarah," he said as he passed. "Evening, Marcus," she replied, not looking up from the supply cabinet. That was their entire conversation. 5 words. The same 5 words they'd exchanged every night for 3 years got at 2:17 a.m. Everything went to hell. The first ambulance arrived with a motorcycle accident victim, a kid barely out of high school with a compound fracture and internal. Bleeding. While Dr. Martinez worked to stabilize him, 2 more ambulances screamed into the bay. Multi-car accident on the interstate. 4 victims, 2 critical. Sarah was inserting in 4 into the motorcycle victim when the code blue alarm shattered. The night. Room 314. Cardiac arrest. In most hospitals, a code blue meant controlled chaos. Specific people running to specific places with specific purposes. But Memorial Hospital was understaffed on nights, and when multiple emergencies hit at once, controlled. Chaos became just chaos. Dr. Martinez was elbow deep in surgery on the motorcycle kid. 2 nurses were working the car accident victims. Sarah grabbed the crash cart and ran for the elevator, knowing she'd probably be the only qualified person who could reach room 314 in time. The elevator was taking forever. She pounded the call button, cursing under her breath, when she heard footsteps behind her. Not running steps. Measured, deliberate steps that somehow kept pace with her urgency without seeming hurried. Marcus appeared beside her, but something was different. The stillness was gone. In its place was a kind of focused intensity that made the air around him feel charged. His eyes weren't scanning randomly anymore. They were tracking threats, calculating responses, measuring distances with military precision. Elevators. "Too slow," he said, and his voice had changed too. It carried authority now, the kind that expected to be obeyed without question. "What?" Sarah started to ask, but Marcus was already moving toward the stairwell. Room 314. Cardiac arrest. "Take the stairs," he said, holding the door open for her. Not suggesting. Ordering. Sarah found herself following without question, which surprised her. She'd never taken orders from a security guard before. But something in his voice, something in the way he carried himself, made arguing seem impossible. They climbed the stairs in silence, Marcus matching her pace exactly. Not struggling to keep up, not breathing hard, just moving with an efficiency that seemed effortless. As they reached the 3rd floor, Sarah realized she wasn't even winded. Somehow, Marcus had set a pace that was both urgent and sustainable. Like he'd done this before. Many times, they burst through the stairwell door and into the 3rd floor corridor. Room 314 was at the far end, and Sarah could hear the frantic voices of the patient's family through the door. She ran, the crash cart's wheels squealing on the polished floor. Marcus didn't run. He moved with purpose, his eyes already cataloging the scene before they reached it. A woman in her 50s was screaming in Spanish. An older man was pacing, his hands shaking. 2 teenagers huddled against the wall, crying. And in the bed, a man in his 70s was dying. Sarah went to work immediately, checking vitals, preparing the defibrillator, falling into the rhythms of emergency medicine. But she was alone. No doctor, no other nurses, just her and the dying man and a family that was falling apart. That's when she heard Marcus speak. "Ma'am," he said to the screaming woman, and his voice cut through her hysteria like a blade. Not harsh, but absolutely certain. "I need you to step back and let her work." The woman looked at him, something in his tone penetrating her panic. She stepped back. "Sir," Marcus continued, addressing the older man, "take your family to the waiting area. Now." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even really an order. It was something deeper than that. something that carried the weight of absolute authority. The kind of voice that had been obeyed in life or death situations before. The family moved without argument. Sarah worked on the patient, but she could feel Marcus behind her, not interfering, but somehow making everything easier. When she needed space, people moved. When she needed equipment, it appeared. When the patient's heart finally responded to the defibrillator and settled into a weak but steady rhythm, she realized Marcus had been conducting the entire emergency without saying a word. As she stabilized the patient and called for transport to ICU, Sarah became aware of something else. Marcus wasn't watching the patient anymore. He was watching the hallway, positioned where he could see both directions, his body angled to protect her while she worked, like a soldier covering a medic. A thought hit her so suddenly that she almost dropped the IV bag. That's what he reminded her of. Not a security guard, not a civilian, a soldier. But not just any soldier. The way he moved, the way he commanded without commanding, the way he'd taken control of chaos and made it ordered. This was someone who'd been in charge of other soldiers. Someone who'd made life and death decisions before as the ICU team. Arrived to transport the patient, Sarah found herself studying Marcus more carefully. He'd stepped back now, melting into the background like he always did. But she'd seen something in that emergency room that couldn't be unseen. Marcus, she said quietly as they rode the elevator back down. Yeah? Where did you serve? The elevator was silent for a long moment. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the question hanging between them. Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years, she saw something other than polite distance in his eyes. She saw calculation, assessment, the look of someone deciding how much truth to reveal. What makes you think I served? He asked. The way you moved up there, the way you took charge. That wasn't security guard training. Another long silence. Army, Marcus said finally. Long time ago. Sarah nodded, but something told her there was more to it than that. A lot more. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Marcus stepped out, returning to his quiet rounds as if nothing had happened. But Sarah remained in the elevator for a moment, her mind racing. She'd worked with dozens of veterans over the Chi. Years. Some were medics who transitioned to civilian nursing. Others were former MPs who'd become security guards. But none of them moved like Marcus. None of them carried themselves with that kind of quiet authority. The next few nights passed. Normally, but Sarah found herself watching Marcus differently. She noticed things she'd missed before. The way he unconsciously checked his 6 every few minutes. The way he positioned himself in rooms to control sight lines. The way his eyes tracked patterns in the hospital traffic, noting what was normal and what wasn't. Most telling was his reaction to a fight that broke out in the ER waiting room. A drunk patient's family member started swinging at a nurse, and before security could respond, Marcus appeared. He didn't run, didn't shout. He simply materialized behind the man and applied what looked like a gentle grip to his shoulder. Man dropped to his knees immediately, his face contorting in pain. "You're going to calm down now," Marcus said quietly. "Not if you understand." The man nodded frantically. Marcus released his grip, and the man stayed on his knees, rubbing his shoulder and looking at Marcus with a mixture of pain and fear. "Good," Marcus said. "Security will escort you out now." Sarah had seen that technique before, in self-defense classes taught by military instructors. It was a pressure point manipulation that could drop someone instantly without causing permanent damage. Not something they taught in hospital security training. A week later, her curiosity got the better of her. During our break, Sarah found herself in the hospital's administrative office, scrolling through the employee database on one of the computers. She pulled up Marcus's file, expecting to find the usual background check information. Previous employment references. What she found instead was almost nothing. Marcus Chun, hired 3 years ago. Previous employer listed as private security. Contractor. Reference contact information that led to a disconnected phone number. Emergency contact listed as none available. Most unusual was his hire date. He'd been employed by the hospital exactly 1 week after his previous job ended. No gap in employment, no transition period. Like he'd been placed there. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind working through possibilities. Private security contractor could mean anything from mall cop to something else entirely. She spent the rest of her break doing internet searches, trying to find any trace of Marcus Chun online. Social media, news articles, professional profiles. Nothing. It was like he hadn't existed before 3 years ago. That night, she worked up the courage to ask him directly. She found him during his rounds, checking the locks on the ambulance bay doors. "Marcus," she said, "can I ask you something?" He looked up from the door he was testing. "Sure." "What kind of private security work did you do before this?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus straightened slowly, his expression unreadable. "The kind where you don't talk about it afterward," he said finally. "Like military contracting?" Marcus studied her face for a long moment. "Why are you asking, Sarah?" "Because I've been a trauma nurse for 5 years, and I've worked with a lot of veterans. None of them move like you do. None of them take charge like you did the other night. Maybe they just had different jobs in the military." "Maybe," Sarah said. "Or maybe you had a job that was different from the military." Marcus finished checking the door lock and turned to face her fully. In the dim light of the ambulance bay, his face was half in shadow, but she could see his eyes clearly. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen things he couldn't talk about. "Some jobs," he said quietly, "you carry with you wherever you go. Even when you're done with them, they're not done with you. Is that why you're here? Working nights in a hospital instead of ... Instead of what?" Sarah realized she didn't know how to finish that sentence. Instead of whatever it was he used to do. Instead of using skills that were obviously far beyond hospital security. "I'm here," Marcus said, "because this is where I need to be." He started to walk away, then paused. "Sarah," he said without turning around, "some people think they're protecting their country when they carry guns and kick down doors. But sometimes the most important protection happens in places like this. Keeping watch over people who can't protect themselves." He disappeared into the hospital, leaving Sarah standing alone in the ambulance bay, understanding finally why Marcus had seemed so different from other security guards. He wasn't guarding a building. He was still on mission. The revelation changed everything about how Sarah saw the hospital's night shift. Marcus wasn't just a security guard making rounds. He was a guardian, a silent protector who traded one battlefield for another. And somewhere in the shadows of his past was a story that would probably never be told, but it didn't need to be told. It was lived every night in the quiet corridors of Memorial Hospital by a man who'd found a different way to serve. Some warriors never stop fighting. They just find new battles, new people to protect, new ways to stand guard in the darkness. Marcus Chun was one of those warriors. And now Sarah knew why the hospital had felt safer with him there, even when no one realized. He was watching. So I ask you, have you ever worked alongside someone who seemed ordinary until you realized they were anything but? Someone whose past was written in the way they moved, the way they responded to crisis, the way they quietly kept everyone safe. Share their story in the comments. Let us know what city you're watching from. And if this story moved you, subscribe to The Human Stories, because the most powerful guardians are often the ones we never notice until the moment we need them most. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the person keeping you safe is The one you walk past every day without a second glance.